Run your tongue across your teeth right now. Feel that every single one of them, smooth, intact, yours. Now imagine someone tells you they all have to come out, every last one. Not because they're rotten, not because they hurt, but because it would be cheaper than fixing them later. That was a wedding gift in Victorian England. And the replacements, they might be carved from hippopotamus vorfae or pulled from the jaws of dead soldiers. Subscribe and stick around. To understand why Victorian women feared the dentist, you first have to understand what a dentist was in the 1800s. For most of the century, there was no such thing as a trained dentist. The first dental school in the world, the Baltimore College of Dental Surgery, didn't open until 1840. Before that, if you had a toothache, you went to whoever would help: a barber, a blacksmith, a traveling showman at a market fair. The village blacksmith doubled as a tooth puller in many rural communities. He already had the pliers. At market fairs, tooth pullers would set up near the musicians. The music helped drown out the screaming. Sometimes they planted accomplices in the crowd. A man pretending to have terrible pain would climb onto the stage. The tooth puller would pretend to extract, pulling out a bloody molar he'd palmed earlier. The fake patient would leap with joy. The real patients had a very different experience, because until 1844, there was no anesthesia for dental work. None. Before that year, your options for pain relief were a swig of whiskey, a dose of laudanum, or biting down on a strip of leather. Some patients were simply held down by assistants while the tooth was wrenched free. The French dentist Pierre Fauchard described the process in 1728. The instruments used for extraction are large pincers, which grasp the tooth and do not let go their hold, even if the patient shrieks as much as he likes. Then, a crooked instrument loosens the tooth and causes horrible pain. Then, a hammer drives the pincers home at each blow. And the greater part of the time, the patient is overcome by the pain and shrieks dreadfully. That is not a horror novel. That is a dental textbook. The two main extraction tools were called the pelican and the dental key. The pelican had a pad placed against one side of the gum and a metal claw that gripped the other side of the tooth. A downward twist tore the tooth out, along with gum tissue, and sometimes chunks of jawbone. The dental key worked like a corkscrew. You fitted the hook over the tooth, turned the handle, and hoped it came out clean. It often didn't. The tooth would shatter under the force and have to be picked out of the bleeding gum piece by piece. Sometimes the jaw itself fractured during extraction, and there was nothing anyone could do about that. Now, why were so many teeth rotting in the first place? Sugar. The transatlantic slave trade had made sugar cheap and widely available across Europe. By the 1800s, the amount of sugar consumed in Britain increased fourfold between 1700 and 1800. Sweet treats, sugary tea, jams, candied fruits, treacle puddings. The Victorian diet was devastating to teeth, and the wealthy suffered worst of all. Sugar was a luxury that rotted you from the inside out, and the tools for cleaning them were almost useless. Most people cleaned their teeth with water and a rough cloth. Some used twigs or a brush made from hog bristle. Tooth powders were available but often did more harm than good. They contained brick dust, crushed oyster shells, charcoal, chalk. These were abrasives that stripped enamel right off the teeth, making decay even worse. One popular whitening treatment used nitric acid, which literally dissolved the tooth surface, so cavities were epidemic, and the only reliable treatment was extraction. But here is the thing. For women specifically, the situation was even worse. In Victorian England, dental care was expensive, prohibitively expensive for most families. When a woman married, her husband became financially responsible for her medical care, and dental problems were considered inevitable. Not if your teeth would rot, but when. So a practical solution emerged, one that sounds insane by modern standards. As a wedding gift, many Victorian brides had every single tooth in their head extracted. even if her teeth were perfectly healthy, even if nothing was wrong at all. The logic was simple: pull them all now and buy one set of dentures that is cheaper than decades of dental emergencies. In Glasgow, this was so common it became a recognized tradition. Matrimonial dentures, they were called. Imagine that. Your wedding day approaches and your gift isn't jewelry or fine linen. It is an appointment with a man who will rip every tooth from your skull without anesthesia in the early decades and replace them with the teeth of strangers, because that is where the replacement teeth came from. Dentures could be made from ivory hippopotamus, walrus elephant, but ivory yellowed quickly and rotted faster than real teeth. The best dentures were made from actual human teeth, and the question was where to get them. One source was the desperately poor who sold their own teeth for a few shillings, young women dying of tuberculosis, the starving, anyone with good teeth and bad luck. There was another option that sounds even worse: tooth transplantation, a living donor's tooth pulled from one mouth and jammed directly into yours. One account describes a young woman of rank who had a donor tooth transplanted to replace a decayed one. It fastened perfectly at first. 5 weeks later, her mouth erupted in ulcers. Her gums corroded away. Several of her own teeth fell out. She nearly died. The donor tooth had carried disease directly into her bloodstream. Another source was grave robbers, resurrectionists. They were called. They broke into churchyards at night and pulled teeth from fresh corpses. If the body was too decayed to bother with, they'd just take the jaw. But the most prized teeth of all came from battlefields. After the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, roughly 43,000 men lay dead or dying. Scavengers followed the armies with pliers. They swarmed the battlefield, pulling the front teeth from the fallen. Young, healthy soldiers, good teeth, the prime source. Barrels of teeth were shipped across Europe and sold to dentists. These became known as Waterloo teeth. The term stuck for decades. Teeth harvested from the dead after the Crimean War and the American Civil War were still marketed as Waterloo teeth. Dentists actually advertised them. Waterloo ivory, guaranteed from young, healthy soldiers. So when a Victorian bride sat down for her dentures to be fitted, the teeth in her mouth may have been ripped from a corpse on a battlefield thousands of miles away. And even the dentures themselves were an ordeal. The teeth were riveted onto plates made of gold, ivory, or vulcanized rubber. The top plate was held in by springs. The bottom was weighted to stay in place. They were uncomfortable, they were ill-fitting, they caused sores and infections in the gums. Most early dentures couldn't even be used for eating. They were purely cosmetic. You took them out to eat, then put them back in for appearances. And they smelled ivory-absorbed bacteria. The base rotted. The breath was appalling. For those who kept their natural teeth but needed repair, the options weren't much better. Fillings were made from gold if you were wealthy, lead if you weren't, and increasingly mercury amalgam, a mixture of mercury, silver, and tin packed directly into the cavity. Nobody understood the long-term effects of putting mercury in someone's mouth. It wouldn't be questioned seriously until the 20th century. Then, in 1844, a Connecticut dentist named Horace Wells changed everything, or tried to. He attended a public demonstration of nitrous oxide, laughing gas. A young man under its influence gashed his leg badly during the show, but kept running around, apparently feeling no pain. Wells made the connection. He could use this for tooth extraction. But his public demonstration went wrong. The patient screamed. The audience booed. Wells was humiliated. 2 years later, in 1846, ether was successfully used as a dental anesthetic. And later, chloroform, which sometimes killed the patient outright, but at least you didn't feel the extraction. Even with anesthesia, dental visits remained terrifying well into the late 1800s. Drills were operated by foot pedals, like sewing machines. They were slow and imprecise. Infections after procedures were common because sterilization practices barely existed. Patients died from dental abscesses that spread to the brain or the bloodstream. In London's parish records from 1665, teeth was listed as a cause of death for 115 people in a single week. A toothache could kill you, and everyone knew it. So people tried everything to avoid the dentist. Clove oil, which actually worked as a mild numbing agent and is still used today. Laudanum, which was opium dissolved in alcohol, effective but brutally addictive. Rubbing a frog on your gums, kissing a donkey, applying a dead mouse to the tooth. These were all documented remedies. One medieval tradition that persisted into the Victorian era was the belief in the toothworm. The idea that a tiny creature burrowed into your tooth and caused the pain when it wriggled, you suffered. When it rested, the pain stopped. People smeared honey on aching teeth at night and sat up with tweezers, waiting to catch the worm as it emerged. The toothworm theory wasn't fully abandoned until the mid-1800s. And this is what makes the Victorian story so dark. The century that finally understood what caused tooth decay. The century that invented anesthesia, that opened dental schools, that professionalized the field, was also the century that told women to rip out their perfectly healthy teeth as a wedding present. Because progress and cruelty existed side by side, one didn't cancel the other. In the memoir Silvertown, a woman describes taking her daughter out on her 17th birthday. The girl thought she was being treated to something special. Instead, she was taken to a local man who strapped her to a chair and pulled every tooth from her head. She was 17 and her mother watched the whole thing. Not out of cruelty, but because she believed she was protecting her daughter from a lifetime of agony. And she wasn't entirely wrong. People died from dental infections. A rotten tooth could turn septic. An abscess could reach the brain. In a world without antibiotics, removing the teeth was removing the threat. It was brutal, but it made a kind of terrible sense. This practice didn't stop with Queen Victoria's death in 1901. It persisted into the 1920s, the 1940s, even the 1960s. Women in their 20s having perfectly good teeth removed because a dentist told them it would be cheaper in the long run, or because a husband decided he couldn't afford dental bills. One woman's grandmother in her mid-20s in the 1960s was told by her dentist she could either have one visible tooth pulled or have them all removed and get dentures. She chose the dentures. She was 26 years old. The next time you sit in a dentist's chair, with the numbing gel, the gentle hands, the tiny drill that barely hums, remember that 200 years ago someone sat in the same position with no numbing, no gentle hands, and a tool designed to wrench bone from jaw. And if she was a bride, she might have been smiling through dentures made from a dead soldier's teeth, pulled from a battlefield, boiled clean, riveted into ivory, and placed in her mouth as a gift. If this kept you watching, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.